I like people telling me what they think, right? Because people have come up to me and they told me some really wild things. And the thing, as far as I'm concerned, whatever they say, they're correct.
The set of Reservoir Dogs was supposed to launch a new director's career. Instead, a veteran actor pulled a gun and nearly killed the movie. That was only the beginning of Quentin Tarantino's nightmare experiences with 6 big names. Lawrence Tierney on Reservoir Dogs. The first feature Quentin Tarantino ever directed was nearly derailed by one man. Lawrence Tierney, cast as crime boss Joe Cabot in Reservoir Dogs, 1992, should have been the steady hand in the story. Instead, he turned the set into a circus. Tierney wasn't new to trouble. By the early 1990s, he had a long history of arrests and bar fights. He carried that same attitude onto Tarantino's small, low-budget set. The crew expected professionalism from a Hollywood veteran. What they got was hostility and defiance. From day one, Tierney resisted direction. He didn't like being told where to stand. He would deliver lines his own way, ignoring the carefully scripted dialogue that Tarantino demanded word for word. For a young director trying to prove himself, this was torture. Tarantino thrived on precision. Tierney thrived on doing the opposite. Michael Madsen later said Tierney was a crazy old man who scared almost everyone. Harvey Keitel tried to keep the peace, but even he avoided confrontations. The atmosphere became toxic. Days with Tierney were filled with tension, and the crew never knew when he might erupt. Tarantino, usually known for his energy and enthusiasm, began losing his patience. During one clash, he stormed off set, telling producer Lawrence Bender that he couldn't take it anymore. The production was small, the budget tight, and every delay risked killing the film. Having his lead character resist him at every turn pushed Tarantino to the breaking point. The worst moment came during a rehearsal. Tarantino and Tierney argued over a minor detail in a scene. Instead of resolving it, Tierney escalated. He became aggressive, shouting and refusing to cooperate. The young director realized he was trapped with an actor who not only wouldn't listen but actively undermined him. After production wrapped, Tarantino fired Tierney and swore never to work with him again. He later called Tierney a complete lunatic, one of the most unprofessional people he had ever encountered. That comment wasn't hyperbole. For the rest of his career, Tarantino carried the memory of his disastrous first collaboration. Tierney's on-set gun incident. The worst clash between Quentin Tarantino and Lawrence Tierney wasn't just about missed lines or bad behavior. It involved a gun. During the filming of Reservoir Dogs, the tension that had been building finally boiled over, and the crew saw just how dangerous Tierney could be. The story came out years later in cast interviews. Michael Madsen recalled that Tierney's temper wasn't just an annoyance, it scared people. He said Tierney had a screw loose and that the younger actors didn't know how to handle him. Tarantino tried, but every confrontation ended with shouting. The most infamous incident happened after an argument that spiraled out of control. Accounts differ on the exact spark, but the outcome was the same. Tierney pulled a gun. Whether it was real or a prop, witnesses say the threat felt real. This wasn't just another actor being difficult, it was reckless and dangerous. On a small, low-budget film like Reservoir Dogs, safety was already fragile. Tarantino had staked his career on making the movie work. Tierney's outburst nearly shut it all down in an instant. Afterward, Tarantino made a decision. Tierney would not be part of his future projects. He might have finished shooting his scenes, but his relationship with the director ended that day. Tarantino later told friends and interviewers that Tierney was impossible to control, calling him a complete lunatic. For a filmmaker who demanded total control of his set, that was the ultimate deal-breaker. The crew didn't forget it either. Stories about the gun incident became part of Reservoir Dogs' lore. For some, it added to the outlaw mystique of the film. For those who lived through it, it was a reminder of how close the production came to disaster. Tierney's career never recovered. He kept acting in small roles, often typecast as tough guys, but he was blacklisted from serious collaborations. For Tarantino, it was a lesson learned the hard way. Never tolerate behavior that puts the crew at risk, no matter how good the performance looks on screen. Bruce Willis on Pulp Fiction. By the time Quentin Tarantino moved on to Pulp Fiction in 1994, he had clout. Reservoir Dogs had made him a name, and he could attract big stars. One of the biggest was Bruce Willis, fresh off the Die Hard series. Willis played Butch Coolidge, a worn-down boxer who double-crosses Marcellus Wallace. On screen, the role gave Willis one of his most memorable performances. Off-screen, things weren't smooth. Tarantino's style was rigid. He demanded his dialogue be delivered exactly as written. For many actors, that was fine. For Willis, who was used to improvising and shaping his characters, it was frustrating. Tension built as he tried to bring his own rhythm to lines, while Tarantino pushed back hard. The set was filled with contrasts. Samuel L. Jackson thrived under Tarantino's control, memorizing dialogue word for word. John Travolta followed direction closely, grateful for his career revival. Willis, however, wasn't used to giving up creative control. He had star power, and that clashed with Tarantino's authority as a young but rising director. Reports say Willis challenged Tarantino during rehearsals. He would question blocking, delivery, even the tone of his character. Tarantino, protective of his vision, didn't take it lightly. Crew members noticed the coldness between them. While it never reached the chaos of Lawrence Tierney, the friction was visible. Tarantino later hinted at the struggle in interviews, describing some collaborations as a battle of wills. Though he didn't name names, insiders pointed to Willis. The actor himself stayed quiet, but stories of arguments and heated exchanges lingered. Despite the clashes, the performance worked. Butch became one of the film's most iconic characters, grounding the chaos of Pulp Fiction with grit and toughness. Willis delivered, but the price was constant tension behind the scenes. Willis's ego battles behind the camera. The friction between Quentin Tarantino and Bruce Willis on Pulp Fiction didn't stop with rehearsals. It carried over behind the camera, where Willis's Hollywood stature collided with Tarantino's growing reputation as a director who demanded obedience. Willis was already one of the highest-paid actors in the world. He came in with the weight of Die Hard and Moonlighting behind him, a proven box office draw. Tarantino, meanwhile, was the hot new talent, a writer-director with a breakout hit and the backing of Harvey Weinstein's Miramax. Both men had leverage, neither liked giving it up. Stories from the set describe Willis as questioning choices that others simply accepted. If he felt a camera angle didn't flatter him, he said so. If he thought his character deserved more edge, he brought it up. For Tarantino, who had crafted every beat of dialogue and shot with precision, this looked like ego. He had no patience for actors treating his script like a rough draft. The clash came to a head in scenes between Butch and Marcellus Wallace. Ving Rhames followed Tarantino's lead with ease. Willis pushed back. He wanted more control over his delivery and presentation. Tarantino stood his ground. Insiders later said it created a chilly dynamic, with both men unwilling to bend. Even so, Willis delivered. His scenes, especially the showdown with Zed, earned praise as some of his best work of the decade, but the process left scars. Tarantino avoided mentioning Willis in later retrospectives, while praising Travolta and Jackson. The silence spoke volumes. Hollywood gossip at the time suggested Tarantino would not cast Willis again, and that proved true. Unlike Samuel L. Jackson, who became a recurring collaborator, Willis never returned. For Tarantino, it was a matter of authority. He couldn't risk another battle with a star who demanded as much control as he did. Uma Thurman on Kill Bill. When Quentin Tarantino began work on Kill Bill in the early 2000s, Uma Thurman was more than just a lead actress. She was a close friend and a creative partner. They had bonded on Pulp Fiction, where she played Mia Wallace. Tarantino often said she was his muse. That made what happened during Kill Bill Volume 1 even more shocking. The trouble centered on a driving stunt filmed in Mexico. Thurman was asked to perform it herself, even though she wasn't comfortable behind the wheel at high speed. The car, a blue Carmen Ghia, had been altered for filming. According to Thurman, the seat wasn't steady, and the road surface was rough. She asked for a stunt driver. Tarantino insisted she do it, promising the road was safe and the car stable. On the day of the shoot, Thurman drove the car and crashed into a tree. She suffered a concussion and injuries to her knees and neck. The footage later surfaced, showing the impact in her struggle afterward. For years, she kept quiet about the incident. In 2018, Thurman spoke publicly about what happened in an interview with the New York Times. She said Tarantino pressured her into the stunt and that she felt betrayed. She called it negligent and admitted she still carried the pain from her injuries. The video of the crash, which she later released, showed just how dangerous the moment had been. The revelation caused an uproar. Fans who had admired the partnership between Tarantino and Thurman were shocked. Tarantino defended himself, saying he never intended harm and that he had tested the car beforehand. He admitted regret, acknowledging that asking her to drive had been the wrong call. He called it the biggest regret of my career. What made the situation more intense was the backdrop. The Kill Bill set was already demanding. The film required brutal fight scenes, long hours, and heavy choreography. Thurman carried most of it, delivering a performance that pushed her to the limit physically. The crash added a layer of mistrust that never went away. Fallout between Tarantino and Thurman. The crash on the set of Kill Bill didn't just injure Uma Thurman, it broke her trust in Quentin Tarantino. For years, their friendship had been one of the most talked-about director-actor partnerships in Hollywood. After that day in Mexico, it was never the same. Thurman kept working until filming wrapped, but insiders noted the shift. She became more guarded around Tarantino. Scenes that required close cooperation, like the sword fight with Daryl Hannah or the bloody showdown with Lucy Liu, were finished professionally, yet the warmth between actress and director was gone. For a long time, Thurman stayed silent. She didn't speak publicly about the crash or the tension it caused. Tarantino also avoided the subject. On the surface, it looked as if nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, the partnership had collapsed. In 2004, when Kill Bill Volume 2 premiered, Thurman walked the red carpet and promoted the film as expected. Still, she kept her distance from Tarantino during interviews. Friends of both later said that what had once been a playful, collaborative bond had hardened into something cold. The truth finally came out in 2018 when Thurman gave her account to the New York Times. She described Tarantino's insistence that she drive the car, the resulting injuries, and the years of anger she carried. The article included the crash footage, which she had fought to obtain from the studio. The release of that video left little room for doubt. Audiences saw the impact for themselves. Tarantino responded quickly. He admitted fault, calling it one of the worst mistakes of his career. He said he had never meant to put Thurman in danger, but acknowledged that he had pressured her. In interviews, he spoke about the guilt he still felt, emphasizing that he and Thurman eventually reconciled. That reconciliation wasn't simple. Thurman confirmed that Tarantino did apologize, but she also made clear that the incident would never be forgotten. Their once easy friendship had been replaced by a strained respect. They could still talk, but the trust was gone. Daryl Hannah on Kill Bill. If Uma Thurman was Quentin Tarantino's muse, Daryl Hannah was the opposite. Their time together on Kill Bill was marked by open conflict. Hannah played Elle Driver, the cold-blooded assassin with an eye patch. On screen, she was one of the film's most memorable villains. Off-screen, Tarantino admitted he disliked working with her. The tension began early in production. Tarantino was known for his detailed direction. Every pause, every word, every gesture had to be exact. Hannah, who had been a major star in the 1980s with Splash and Blade Runner, had her own style. She preferred flexibility and space to shape her character. That didn't sit well with Tarantino, who wanted total control. Reports from the crew suggest that arguments broke out over blocking and performance choices. Hannah would interpret her role one way, only for Tarantino to stop her and demand something different. Unlike other actors who adjusted to his demands, she pushed back. The resistance created a rift that never healed. Tarantino later spoke about the conflict directly. In interviews, he said he did not enjoy working with Daryl Hannah and made it clear she would not be part of any future projects. For a director who often reused favorite actors, Samuel L. Jackson, Michael Madsen, Uma Thurman, that was a striking statement. Hannah had joined his world once, and once was enough. The irony is that Elle Driver became a fan favorite. Her hospital scene, whistling Twisted Nerve while preparing to kill Thurman's character, remains iconic. The climactic fight between Elle and the bride in a cramped trailer is one of the highlights of Kill Bill Volume 2. Yet the creative energy behind it was born out of a relationship that was openly hostile. After the film, Hannah moved away from big studio projects, taking more independent roles. She rarely spoke about Tarantino directly, but her absence from his later films was obvious. The divide was not rumor, but something both sides allowed to stand without repair. Kurt Russell on Death Proof. When Quentin Tarantino shot Death Proof in 2006 as part of the Grindhouse double feature, he cast Kurt Russell as stuntman Mike. It was a nod to Russell's history in Hollywood as a reliable action star. On screen, Russell delivered a chilling performance. Off-screen, the collaboration was less harmonious. Tarantino's style was obsessive. He wanted every beat of dialogue, every camera move, every stunt timed perfectly. Russell, who had decades of experience with directors of all kinds, was used to some freedom. He liked to build characters through instinct. That didn't match Tarantino's need for strict control. During production, reports circulated of creative clashes. Russell questioned parts of stuntman Mike's behavior, asking why certain lines were delivered in specific ways. He wanted the character to have more nuance, less camp. Tarantino, inspired by the exploitation films he adored, insisted on exaggeration. The back and forth created tension. Crew members later described Russell as professional but occasionally frustrated. He wasn't disruptive like Lawrence Tierney had been years earlier, but the difference in approach was clear. Tarantino saw himself as the ultimate authority. Russell saw himself as a veteran who had earned input. The two met in the middle only after long discussions. One sticking point was the film's long dialogue scenes. Tarantino loved extended stretches of conversation. Russell pushed for tighter pacing, arguing that stuntman Mike should feel more dangerous and less talkative. Tarantino refused. The film was made his way, and Russell followed orders, but not without friction. In later interviews, Tarantino avoided criticizing Russell directly, but admitted Death Proof was one of his least successful experiences. The film underperformed at the box office, and Tarantino later called it the worst movie I ever made. While that wasn't aimed solely at Russell, it colored how the collaboration was remembered. Russell never returned to Tarantino's projects after Death Proof. Fans often asked why, since his performance had been widely praised. The answer was simple: the partnership wasn't smooth enough to repeat. Tarantino had plenty of loyal collaborators who thrived under his demanding direction. Russell wasn't one of them. Channing Tatum on The Hateful Eight. By the time The Hateful Eight went into production in 2014, Quentin Tarantino was one of the most powerful directors in the world. The cast was packed with veterans he trusted, like Samuel L. Jackson, Tim Roth, and Kurt Russell. Then came a surprise name, Channing Tatum. Tatum was cast as Jody DeMurg, the outlaw brother who appears late in the film. His role was brief but crucial, setting up the blood-soaked climax. On paper, the choice looked bold. Tatum was a rising star, known for Magic Mike and 21 Jump Street, not dialogue-heavy westerns. Behind the scenes, the fit wasn't smooth. Tarantino had a habit of handpicking actors who matched his rhythm. Tatum wasn't his idea. Reports say the studio pushed for a bigger box office name to help sell the film internationally. Tarantino agreed, but reluctantly. That lack of enthusiasm carried into the collaboration. On set, Tatum struggled with Tarantino's exacting process. His style leaned more toward improvisation and physicality, traits that worked in action comedies but clashed with Tarantino's word-for-word demands. Crew members noted that Tatum's limited screen time was partly by design. The director didn't want him overshadowing the core cast. Tatum himself later admitted in interviews that working with Tarantino was intimidating. He described the script as like Shakespeare, saying it required a discipline he wasn't used to. While he respected the challenge, it wasn't a natural partnership. The gap between what Tarantino wanted and what Tatum delivered was visible. The result was a strange mismatch. Tatum's role was heavily promoted in marketing, but in the finished film he appears for only a few minutes before being killed off. Fans expecting a major performance were disappointed. Some critics speculated that Tarantino had minimized his part during editing. Whether true or not, it reflected the uneasy nature of their collaboration. After The Hateful Eight, Tarantino moved on without him. Unlike actors who became repeat players in his films, Tatum was a one-time experiment. Tarantino never criticized him openly, but his silence was telling. The partnership ended as quickly as it began. Tarantino's blacklist at 62. Quentin Tarantino turned 62 with one of the most unique resumes in Hollywood. Across his films, he created legendary roles and revived entire careers. But along the way, he also built a private list of actors he vowed never to work with again. 6 names stand out, each tied to specific clashes that left lasting marks. The first was Lawrence Tierney, the veteran from Reservoir Dogs. Tarantino called him a complete lunatic after fights on set and the infamous gun incident. It was the kind of chaos that convinced him never to risk Tierney's presence again. Next came Bruce Willis, whose performance in Pulp Fiction was unforgettable but whose constant pushback wore Tarantino down. Their battles over lines, blocking, and control made clear that this would be a one-time collaboration. Willis never appeared in a Tarantino film again. Then there was Uma Thurman. She was once his muse, but the crash on Kill Bill fractured their bond. Even though they reconciled years later, the damage had been done. She revealed in 2018 how betrayed she felt, ensuring their story would always carry tension. Daryl Hannah followed. Tarantino said openly that he disliked working with her on Kill Bill. Despite her strong performance as Elle Driver, he made it clear she would never return to his projects. For a director who often reused actors he liked, that blunt statement carried weight. Kurt Russell gave him a commanding villain in Death Proof, but creative disagreements soured the partnership. Tarantino later dismissed the entire project as his weakest film, and Russell's absence from later casts spoke volumes. Finally, Channing Tatum in The Hateful Eight. A studio-backed edition, his short role didn't mesh with Tarantino's style. The director delivered the part as written, but quickly moved on, never showing interest in working with Tatum again. Together, these 6 actors represent the exceptions in Tarantino's career. He built long-term partnerships with Samuel L. Jackson, Michael Madsen, Christoph Waltz, and others. But with Tierney, Willis, Thurman, Hannah, Russell, and Tatum, the chemistry broke down. At 62, Tarantino hasn't hidden these clashes. He's spoken directly about some, stayed silent on others, and let his casting choices tell the rest of the story. The smile never left his face. Not during press tours, not during red carpets, not even when the cameras stopped rolling. Pierce Brosnan built a 4-decade career on being Hollywood's gentleman. But beneath that Irish charm, professional tensions simmered, conflicts that stayed buried in production notes and hushed conversations between takes. At 71, Brosnan remains one of cinema's most diplomatic figures. He doesn't name names in vengeful tell-alls. He doesn't blast former colleagues on social media. But the tensions existed. The disagreements happened, the professional relationships that went cold. These aren't stories of hatred, they're stories of creative differences that spiraled, of egos that clashed, of working relationships that never recovered, the kind of conflicts that happen when millions of dollars in artistic visions collide. Barbara Broccoli's iron grip. Barbara Broccoli inherited the James Bond franchise from her father. She controlled everything about 007, every script, every stunt, every perfectly pressed tuxedo. When Pierce Brosnan became Bond in 1995, their relationship started warm, professional, respectful. GoldenEye saved the franchise. The film earned $356 million worldwide. Brosnan was hailed as the perfect modern Bond. Broccoli seemed pleased. The partnership looked golden. But tensions were already forming behind closed doors. By Tomorrow Never Dies, the cracks showed. Brosnan wanted more creative input. He pushed for deeper character development, less gadgets, more psychology. Broccoli and her producing partner Michael Wilson had different ideas. They wanted spectacle. They wanted tradition. They wanted Bond to stay Bond. I was caught in a creative stranglehold, Brosnan later admitted in interviews. He couldn't say what he really thought during production. The franchise machine was too powerful, too protective. Every suggestion met resistance. Every attempt at change hit a wall. The world is not enough brought more friction. Brosnan questioned dialogue. He challenged action sequences that felt repetitive. He wanted Bond to evolve. The producers wanted formula. The tension affected the set. Crew members noticed. Co-stars felt it. Die Another Day became the breaking point. The film made $431 million, but critics savaged it. Invisible cars, ice palaces, CGI, tsunamis. Brosnan openly criticized elements of the film years later. He called parts of it too fantastical. The producers didn't appreciate the criticism. Then came the phone call, or rather, the lack of one. Brosnan learned he was done as Bond through his agent. No personal conversation, no farewell meeting, just business. Cold, efficient business. I was caught completely off guard, he revealed. The announcement of Daniel Craig as the new Bond came while Brosnan thought negotiations were ongoing. The relationship never recovered. When asked about Broccoli in later interviews, Brosnan's answers became shorter, more careful. The warmth disappeared. He attended Bond anniversary events but kept interactions minimal. Professional courtesy replaced genuine friendship. In 2005, shortly after his Bond exit, Brosnan made a telling comment. I gave them my heart, my soul, my everything. And they gave me a pink slip. The bitterness was subtle but present. Years of creative frustration compressed into one sentence. The financial disagreements added another layer. Brosnan discovered he received no back-end participation from the film's massive profits. While the movies earned over $1.4 billion combined, his compensation remained fixed. Broccoli and Wilson controlled the profit structure completely. Every request for renegotiation met the same response: take it or leave it. Salma Hayek's method clash. Salma Hayek brought intensity to every role, even romantic comedies, especially romantic comedies. When she signed on for After the Sunset in 2004, opposite Pierce Brosnan, the chemistry looked perfect on paper. In reality, it was something else entirely. The film was supposed to be light, breezy, a jewel thief caper in the Bahamas. But Hayek and Brosnan approached their roles from opposite directions. She wanted depth. He wanted ease. She pushed for rehearsals. He preferred spontaneity. Director Brett Ratner later described the tension diplomatically. They had different methods, but crew members were less diplomatic in their observations. The two stars rarely spoke between takes. They maintained separate areas on set. The tropical paradise setting couldn't warm the professional freeze. Hayek wanted to explore her character's motivations. Why would she stay with a jewel thief? What drove her loyalty? Brosnan saw it simpler. It was a popcorn movie. The audience didn't need psychology. They needed entertainment. Their love scenes became particularly challenging. What should have been passionate felt mechanical. The camera caught bodies in motion but missed the spark. Ratner had to shoot around the coldness, extra close-ups, careful editing, movie magic compensating for missing chemistry. The press tour revealed more. Hayek and Brosnan did minimal joint interviews. When they appeared together, they sat far apart. They answered questions professionally, but never built on each other's responses. No inside jokes, no shared stories from set, just two actors promoting a film they happened to be in together. The film flopped. Critics noticed the lack of chemistry immediately. Roger Ebert wrote that the leads seemed to be in different movies. The box office reflected the disconnect. Just $28 million domestic against a $55 million budget. Neither actor badmouthed the other publicly. That wasn't their style, but they never worked together again. When asked about future collaborations, both gave vague non-answers, the kind Hollywood recognizes as polite rejection. Years later, Hayek discussed the challenges of romantic comedies without naming Brosnan directly. Some actors think comedy means not trying. They're wrong. Comedy requires more effort, not less. Whether she meant Brosnan specifically remained unspoken. But those who worked on After the Sunset drew their own conclusions. The costume fittings became another source of conflict. Hayek wanted her wardrobe to reflect her character's complexity. Brosnan thought she was overthinking bikinis and sundresses. The costume designer found herself mediating between two stars who couldn't agree on anything, even fabric choices. Jack Scalia's unwelcome shadow. When Brosnan left Remington Steele in 1987, the show needed a new lead. Entered Jack Scalia, the network's choice, the producer's solution. And apparently, Brosnan's professional irritant for years to come. The situation was complicated. Brosnan didn't choose to leave Remington Steele. He was forced back when NBC unexpectedly renewed the show, costing him the James Bond role that went to Timothy Dalton. Then the show was canceled anyway. Salt in the wound. Scalia stepped into a failed revival attempt. The show was restructured, renamed, and ultimately failed. But Scalia's presence represented everything Brosnan lost, the role that trapped him, the opportunity that slipped away, the career moment that went sideways. They crossed paths at industry events throughout the late 1980s. Witnesses described interactions that were icy at best. Brosnan, usually gracious, would excuse himself quickly. Scalia would make comments about carrying on the legacy, each word a small needle. The tension peaked at a 1989 NBC affiliate event. Both were invited, both attended. The network sat them at the same table. What followed was an evening of careful avoidance. Brosnan spoke to everyone except Scalia. Scalia tried forcing conversation. The discomfort was visible to everyone present. One NBC executive later recalled, "Pierce was professional, but you could feel the resentment. Jack kept trying to bond over the Remington Steele connection. Pierce wanted nothing to do with it." The evening ended with both men leaving early, separately. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Scalia's version of the show failed spectacularly. Brosnan went on to become James Bond, but the initial wound never fully healed. That period represented Brosnan's lowest professional moment. Scalia was the walking reminder. In interviews years later, when asked about Remington Steele, Brosnan would discuss the original run warmly. He never mentioned the revival attempt, never acknowledged Scalia's involvement. The silence spoke volumes. Lee Tamahori's CGI nightmare. Lee Tamahori came to die another day with a vision. Make Bond bigger, louder, more explosive than ever. Pierce Brosnan came with fatigue, 4 films deep, ready for something different. Their visions collided from day one. Tamahori wanted CGI spectacle. Brosnan wanted practical authenticity. Tamahori pushed for over-the-top action. Brosnan pushed back for grounded character moments. The New Zealand director had made Once Were Warriors gritty, real, powerful, but his Bond was anything but. Lee had drunk the Kool-Aid, one crew member observed. He wanted to out-Bond every previous Bond film. Invisible cars, gene therapy, villains, Madonna cameos. Each decision made Brosnan more uncomfortable, but the machine kept moving. The infamous CGI surf scene became their biggest battle. Brosnan thought it looked ridiculous. Tamahori insisted it was revolutionary. They shot Brosnan's portions against green screen. He hated every second. The finished scene proved his concerns right. Critics called it the worst moment in Bond history. Tamahori's directing style grated on Brosnan. Loud, aggressive, demanding multiple takes for minimal differences. Brosnan, after 4 films, knew what worked. His suggestions were dismissed. His experience ignored. The director wanted his vision, period. The tension affected Brosnan's performance. Usually smooth, he seemed stiff. Usually confident, he appeared tired. The joy that marked GoldenEye was gone, replaced by professional obligation. Going through the motions. During the film's commentary track, recorded separately, Tamahori praised his own decisions repeatedly. Brosnan's track, recorded later, contained telling pauses, diplomatic disagreements, careful criticism wrapped in professional language. When the film released, critics savaged Tamahori's choices: the invisible car, the ice palace, the CGI tsunami. Every excess Brosnan had questioned became a punchline. The film made money but damaged the franchise's credibility. Brosnan never worked with Tamahori again. When asked about him specifically, Brosnan's responses were minimal. He had his vision, was the most he'd say. No elaboration, no warmth, just acknowledgement that Tamahori existed. The director's career never recovered the momentum. His next films were direct-to-video, then television, then nothing. Brosnan continued working steadily. The actor's instincts had been right. The director's vision had been wrong. The sword fight scene crystallized their conflict. Tamahori wanted it completely CGI enhanced. Brosnan trained for weeks with sword masters. He wanted to do it practically. They compromised poorly. Half real, half digital. Neither man satisfied. The scene looked exactly as conflicted as its creation. Denise Richards takes center stage. Denise Richards arrived on The World Is Not Enough as Christmas Jones, nuclear physicist, Bond girl, and according to multiple sources, a source of significant tension for Pierce Brosnan. The casting raised eyebrows immediately. Richards was 28, known for Wild Things and Starship Troopers, not exactly nuclear physicist material. Brosnan reportedly expressed concerns privately. The producers didn't listen. They wanted youth. They wanted magazine covers. Richards approached the role enthusiastically. Too enthusiastically for Brosnan's taste. She gave interviews about being a different kind of Bond girl. She discussed bringing new energy to the franchise. Each interview irritated Brosnan more. He'd been Bond for 3 films. She was a newcomer, talking like a veteran. On set, their approaches clashed. Brosnan liked preparation. Richards preferred spontaneity. Brosnan knew his blocking precisely. Richards would forget and need multiple reminders. The crew noticed Brosnan's patience wearing thin. Their love scenes lacked any chemistry. Brosnan, usually generous with co-stars, seemed to phone it in. Richards tried compensating with energy. It made things worse. Director Michael Apted had to work around the disconnect. The famous "Christmas comes more than once a year" line became a point of contention. Brosnan thought it was terrible. Richards defended it in interviews. She called it fun and cheeky. He silently disagreed. The grimace was subtle but present. Richards dominated the press tour. Every interview became about her. The nuclear physicist and hot pants angle overtook everything. Brosnan, who'd carried the franchise through 2 successful films, became a supporting player in his own movie. The reviews were brutal toward Richards. Critics called her the worst Bond girl ever. Her line delivery was mocked. Her credibility as a scientist ridiculed. Brosnan never defended her publicly. His silence was noticed by industry insiders. When asked about favorite Bond girls in later interviews, Brosnan would mention Sophie Marceau from the same film, Michelle Yeoh from Tomorrow Never Dies, Halle Berry from Die Another Day, never Denise Richards. The omission was consistent, deliberate. Richards tried reconnecting at a charity event in 2010. Witnesses described a brief, cold interaction. Brosnan was polite. Nothing more. She attempted reminiscing about their time filming. He excused himself within minutes. Stephanie Zimbalist's different vision. Stephanie Zimbalist was Remington Steele's other half, Laura Holt to Brosnan's mysterious Steele. For 5 seasons, they were television's sophisticated detective duo. Off-camera, the relationship was professional but complicated. The show demanded chemistry. They delivered it. But Zimbalist came from television. Brosnan aimed for film. She wanted the show to continue. He wanted it to end. These fundamental differences created underlying tension throughout their run. When Brosnan nearly got Bond in 1986, Zimbalist's reaction was telling. Publicly, supportive. Privately, she knew his departure would kill the show. Her career was tied to Remington Steele. His escape attempt threatened everything. NBC's renewal, triggered by Brosnan's Bond announcement, saved her show but trapped him. He returned to set bitter. She was relieved. The dynamic shifted. What was once collaborative became transactional. They did their scenes, nothing more. Zimbalist later admitted the final season was difficult. Pierce was elsewhere mentally, she said. His heart wasn't in it. She was trying to save a show he wanted to leave. Every scene carried that subtext. The wrap party was awkward. Cast and crew celebrated 5 years. Brosnan seemed eager to leave. Zimbalist gave an emotional speech. Brosnan's remarks were brief, professional. The contrast was obvious to everyone. They didn't stay in touch. When Brosnan became Bond, Zimbalist wasn't invited to the premiere. When the show got DVD releases, they did separate commentary tracks. Joint appearances were declined by one or both. In a 2010 interview, Zimbalist revealed they'd only spoken once since the show ended, a brief encounter at an industry event, polite, surface level, then nothing for another decade. When asked about Remington Steele, Brosnan credits it for launching his career. He rarely mentions Zimbalist specifically. When pressed, he'll acknowledge her talent, but warmth is absent. It's professional recognition, not personal fondness. The salary disputes added another layer. Zimbalist discovered Brosnan negotiated a higher per-episode rate despite being added to her established show. The network's explanation was his film potential. She never forgot that slight. It colored every interaction afterward. Greg Kinnear's parallel performance. Greg Kinnear joined Brosnan for The Matador in 2005. On paper, perfect casting. Two charming actors playing against type. Brosnan as a burnout hitman, Kinnear as a desperate salesman. Dark comedy gold. But something was off from the start. Their comedic timing never synced. Where Brosnan went dark, Kinnear went broad. Where Kinnear pulled back, Brosnan pushed forward. They were acting in parallel, not together. Director Richard Shepard noticed immediately. He tried different approaches. More rehearsal, less rehearsal. Improvisation, strict script adherence. Nothing clicked. The actors were professional but disconnected. Kinnear's method involved extensive character backstory. He created elaborate histories for his character. Brosnan found it excessive for a dark comedy. He preferred instinct. The philosophical difference created practical problems. Their big emotional scenes felt forced. The buddy chemistry never materialized. What should have been an odd couple dynamic became two separate performances edited together. Test audiences noticed. The film's tone felt uneven. During promotion, they did the minimum required joint appearances. Their body language was telling. They sat angled away from each other, answered questions without building on each other's responses. No natural banter. The film received decent reviews, but flopped commercially. Critics praised individual performances, but noted the lack of chemistry. The disconnect between the leads undermined the entire premise. Neither actor has worked together since. When asked about future collaborations, both give non-committal answers. They praise each other professionally, but there's no enthusiasm for reunion. Kinnear later worked with other dramatic actors successfully. Brosnan found chemistry with different comedy partners, but together they prove that talent alone doesn't guarantee connection. Sometimes actors just exist in different frequencies. No amount of direction can tune them together. Terry Hatcher's complicated truth. Terry Hatcher came to Tomorrow Never Dies as Paris Carver, Bond's former lover, a pivotal role. But she brought something else to set, a pregnancy she hadn't disclosed, a husband in crisis, and according to multiple sources, an attitude that made filming nearly impossible. The tension started before cameras rolled. Hatcher was pregnant during filming. Morning sickness hit during action sequences. She needed frequent breaks. The production schedule bent around her needs. Brosnan, punctual and professional, watched his second Bond film lose momentum daily. She later claimed Brosnan was cold to her, that he barely spoke between takes. What she didn't mention was why. Her tardiness had become legendary on set. Crew members would place bets on how late she'd be. 30 minutes was considered early. 2 hours wasn't unusual. The kissing scenes became particularly problematic. Hatcher later told press that Brosnan practically choked her during their kiss. She made it sound aggressive. Crew members remembered differently. They recalled multiple takes ruined by her pulling away, by her complaints about angles, by her sudden need for breaks. Director Roger Spottiswoode found himself mediating constantly. Brosnan wanted to work. Hatcher had issues with everything. The lighting, the blocking, the dialogue. Each complaint cost time. Each delay cost money. The $110 million production hemorrhaged cash waiting for their leading lady. The parking lot scene where Paris dies required emotional intimacy. Brosnan tried finding connection. Hatcher seemed elsewhere. They shot it 15 times. Not for perfection, for basic competence. The final take was usable, not good. You can see the distance in their eyes. Hatcher's personal life was imploding during filming. Her husband, John Tenney, was dealing with her fame poorly. She'd arrived to set after fighting, leave early for more fighting. The drama followed her everywhere. It affected everyone's work, Brosnan included. When the film wrapped, they didn't speak at the party. Hatcher left early. Brosnan stayed but kept his distance from her camp. The relief was palpable. Cast and crew could finally relax. The tension that had defined the shoot was over. Years later, Hatcher wrote about the experience in her autobiography. She portrayed herself as a victim of Brosnan's coldness. She never mentioned the pregnancy delays, the constant tardiness, the production disruptions. Her version became the public narrative. Brosnan never responded. That wasn't his style. But in 2019, during a Guardian interview, Brosnan finally addressed it obliquely. Some actors make filming harder than it needs to be. He said, "I've worked with difficult people. You remain professional. You finish the job. You don't work with them again." He didn't name names. He didn't need to. The film succeeded despite their chemistry void. It earned $333 million worldwide. But watch their scenes closely. The distance is visible. Two actors occupying the same frame but existing in different films. The tension practically radiates through the screen. Hatcher never returned to the Bond franchise. She found success with Desperate Housewives. Brosnan did 2 more Bond films without her. Neither mentioned the other in subsequent interviews unless directly asked. And even then, the answers were minimal, professional, cold. The truth was more complex than her autobiography suggested, more layered than his silence implied. But in Hollywood, the truth rarely matters, only the version that gets told most often. And sometimes, the most intriguing tensions are the ones where both parties insist nothing was wrong, while everyone who was there knows differently. Rock Hudson, Tony Curtis, even Shelley Winters had something to say. Behind the Hollywood gloss, Burt Lancaster's relationships told a story the studios buried. If it ever got out, it would have blown the golden age wide open. Early life and circus days. Burt Lancaster was born on the 2nd of November 1913 in East Harlem. His parents were Irish working-class New Yorkers. His father worked for the Postal Service, and his mother ran the home. He grew up tough, restless, and athletic. School bored him. He spent more time climbing street poles and flipping over fences than reading books. By age 19, Lancaster had joined the K Brothers Circus. He wasn't just an acrobat, he was a headliner. He performed with his lifelong friend Nick Cravat, a fellow New Yorker he met in the gym. They trained together, slept in tents, and traveled the country by train, putting on fast-paced tumbling acts that wowed small-town crowds. Their timing was flawless. Their trust ran deep. The circus wasn't glamorous, but it gave Lancaster something Hollywood couldn't teach: control over his body, charm on cue, and comfort with danger. He learned how to perform for people sitting 30 feet away who couldn't hear a word. Everything had to be big, clear, and unforgettable. When the Depression hit, circus work dried up. Lancaster bounced between odd jobs: truck driver, meat packer, even singing waiter. He briefly got into NYU on an athletic scholarship but dropped out. He wanted movement, not lectures. During World War II, he served in the Army's Special Services Division, performing in plays and variety shows for the troops. He kept doing flips in front of tents instead of training with rifles. His act was so good, officers kept him out of combat. After the war, Cravat stayed in his corner. The two reunited in movies like The Flame and the Arrow and The Crimson Pirate, where Cravat, who never spoke on screen, played his silent, stunt-heavy sidekick. It was their circus act all over again, just with brighter costumes and cameras rolling. Lancaster's screen presence came from those circus years. He didn't fake swagger. He earned it in sawdust rings and train cars. The discipline, balance, and showmanship never left him. He and Cravat were inseparable for decades, both on and off screen, but there's no record of anything romantic between them, just loyalty, grit, and a shared history too rare to fake. That bond set the stage for everything that followed. Hollywood breakthrough in 1946. In 1945, Burt Lancaster was working as a salesman in Los Angeles when a casting agent spotted him. He wasn't acting, he wasn't trying. But his look, broad shoulders, confident stance were hard to ignore. The agent asked if he'd ever considered film. Lancaster said he'd give it a shot. That offer led to a screen test, then to a starring role. By 1946, he was front and center in The Killers, opposite Ava Gardner. He was 32, had no acting background, and crushed the role. His performance as the Swede was quiet, menacing, and magnetic. The Killers was a noir hit, and critics locked on to Lancaster's stillness, how he could dominate a scene without saying much. He wasn't a trained actor, but his circus years gave him a physical confidence other stars didn't have. Studios came calling, fast, but instead of signing a long-term contract like most actors did, Lancaster did something bold. He stayed independent. He took short deals and kept his options open. That gave him freedom. Within 2 years, he'd launched his own production company, and by the early 1950s, Hecht Hill Lancaster was producing some of the most talked-about films in town. The real power in Hollywood didn't sit in the spotlight, and Lancaster knew exactly where to find it. He became a regular at private parties where actors, writers, and directors gathered behind closed doors. The events were exclusive and guarded. During this time, he reportedly grew close to Rock Hudson. Hudson wasn't a major name yet, but the two moved in similar circles. Both were tall, charismatic, and carefully managed by the studios. They shared a need for privacy, especially in a town that watched everything. Lancaster never acted like a new star. He walked in like he'd always belonged. One film in, and he had already rewritten the Hollywood playbook. Marriage to Norma Anderson. The same year the Killers made him famous, Burt Lancaster married Norma Anderson in 1946. They tied the knot in Yuma, Arizona, just as his career was catching fire. The timing wasn't ideal. He was suddenly working nonstop, traveling for press and taking meetings with producers who wanted him in every war drama and noir thriller being made. Norma, a former actress herself, stepped back from the spotlight to raise their family. They went on to have 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. At home, Lancaster was known to be strict but affectionate. He expected discipline and hard work, values he had grown up with in Harlem and carried with him through the circus and the army. But fame changes things. Lancaster's career demanded long hours and long absences. By the 1950s, stories were floating around about affairs with both women and, more quietly, men. Norma never went public with details, but a few secondary sources have claimed she once accused him of being romantically involved with both sexes. Those claims never came with direct quotes, and no interviews with Norma exist to confirm them. Still, the whispers lingered. Their marriage lasted over 2 decades, but the cracks were visible. Lancaster had a strong sense of independence. He once said in an interview that he didn't believe in being caged by anyone, which didn't exactly line up with being a family man. Friends said Norma was loyal and patient, but eventually the stress and distance became too much. They officially divorced in 1969. It wasn't a public mess, no tabloid blow-ups or court drama, just a quiet end to a long, complicated marriage. Lancaster kept the details private, as he always did, but the emotional weight was obvious. He rarely spoke about Norma afterward. Despite the rumors, nothing concrete ever proved Lancaster's relationships with men. Still, Norma's quiet presence in his life, then her equally quiet departure, left behind questions people still ask. Was she covering for him? Was she protecting herself? Or was it just a Hollywood marriage stretched too thin? What's certain is this. For over the 2nd of December AIDS, Norma Anderson was part of the Lancaster story. The part not seen on screen. The one without applause. Friendship with Rock Hudson. By the 1950s, he was an A-lister with his own production company, and Rock Hudson was Hollywood's next rising star. Hudson's breakthrough came with Magnificent Obsession in 1954, and by then, he and Lancaster were already crossing paths at private industry events. Their friendship wasn't flashy, but it ran deep enough to catch notice behind the scenes. Both men were tall, broad-shouldered, and commanding on screen. Off-screen, they were known to attend discreet parties thrown by directors, producers, and agents who catered to stars living outside the public mold. These events were designed to keep certain things quiet. The press wasn't invited. What happened there stayed there. In 1960, an FBI memo mentioned both Lancaster and Hudson in connection to a raid on a Beverly Hills mansion. The report described the property as hosting unusual gatherings involving prominent actors. No charges were filed, no names were released to the public, but the memo still made its way into Lancaster's file, which already included notes on his political activism. Lancaster never commented on the memo or any rumors about his connection to the party. Hudson, who later faced enormous pressure to hide his identity, also stayed silent. But insiders who worked in the industry during the 52nd and 62nd have described both men as part of a quiet, protective network. Stars like Hudson, Montgomery Clift, and others navigated a system where being seen in the wrong place could end a career. Lancaster's friendship with Hudson stayed out of the spotlight, but it lasted decades. They never starred in a film together, never gave joint interviews, never posed for staged photos. But they were often seen arriving at the same estates, slipping into the same rooms, and leaving out the back when the night was over. FBI surveillance in the 1950s. While Lancaster was rising in Hollywood, his name was quietly making its way into federal files. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, was tracking actors, directors, and writers suspected of communist sympathies or deviant behavior, as the reports called it. Lancaster fit the profile, politically outspoken, fiercely independent, and socially connected to people Hoover didn't trust. His file wasn't thin. It included notes on his liberal activism, his vocal stance against McCarthyism, and his public support for civil rights. But what raised more eyebrows inside the Bureau were the repeated tips, often anonymous, that questioned his private life. Some claimed he attended gatherings of concern. Others listed him among male guests at parties under unofficial watch. There were no arrests and formal investigations, but the surveillance was constant. Reports mentioned his friendships, his travel partners, and his presence at homes already tagged by the FBI for hosting other suspected figures. None of it was public. The press never caught wind. But Hoover's people took notes. One 1955 memo, now declassified, flagged Lancaster as a subject of interest due to associations with known political radicals and participation in suspect social events. The language was vague on purpose. Agents often avoided naming specific activities. They preferred implication. In Lancaster's case, it was always about proximity, who he stood next to, who he shook hands with, and who he called a friend. Despite the file growing, Lancaster didn't change his behavior. He kept marching in protests, funding independent films, and defending artists blacklisted for leftist views. If he knew the FBI was watching, and he likely did, he didn't let it stop him. Hollywood insiders believed the Bureau kept quiet because Lancaster was too powerful to confront directly. He was bankable, respected, and already beyond the control of studio heads. Going after him would have caused a storm. But the surveillance never stopped. Through the 52nd and 62nd, Hoover's obsession with policing Hollywood's morality left marks on dozens of stars. Lancaster just happened to be one of the few who kept moving forward under the radar on his own terms and without apology. The file stayed open, but he never flinched. Alleged affair with Tony Curtis. On the set of Sweet Smell of Success in 1957, something clicked between Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis. The film was sharp, moody, and cold, and so was their chemistry. Lancaster played J.J. Hunsaker, a ruthless columnist, while Curtis took on the role of a desperate press agent. They were electric on screen, too electric, some said. Rumors started almost immediately. Crew members whispered about how close the two actors had gotten between takes. They ate meals together, rehearsed late, and sometimes disappeared for hours. Neither man addressed the speculation, but the stories never fully went away. Curtis's 2008 memoir, American Prince, revealed his own bisexuality, though he never confirmed any romantic involvement with Lancaster. Still, he did say Lancaster was impossible to ignore and commanded every room he entered. That kind of phrasing didn't stop people from reading between the lines. Their scenes in Sweet Smell only fueled the gossip. Curtis's character is practically begging for Lancaster's approval throughout the film, eyes wide and voice pleading. Lancaster, in turn, keeps a cool, calculating distance. Critics called it brilliant acting. Fans called it something else entirely. Off-camera, the two shared a tense but respectful working relationship. Curtis admired Lancaster's discipline. Lancaster reportedly saw Curtis as a talented but unpredictable performer. They didn't do another film together, but they remained friendly for years. It didn't help that Lancaster was already the subject of quiet speculation in Hollywood circles. his close friendships, his guarded private life, and his habit of attending tightly controlled parties had people talking. Add Tony Curtis young, striking, and newly famous to the mix, and the rumors took on a life of their own. Still, there was no proof. No letters, no photos, no statements. Just timing, energy, and one very memorable performance. If something more happened, they took it to the grave. What's left is the film. Two actors locked in a power game, staring each other down in smoke-filled rooms, cutting each other with words. Shelley Winters claims. Shelley didn't hold back in her 1980 autobiography. She named names, spilled affairs, and gave Hollywood readers more than they bargained for. In the middle of it all was Burt Lancaster. According to Winters, the two had a passionate off and on relationship that stretched through the 1950s while he was still married. She described him as magnetic and unpredictable, one moment charming, the next cold. She claimed their connection went beyond the physical, but admitted it was never stable. He came and went, emotionally and physically. She called him a man who kept most of himself locked behind a door no one could open. Winters never accused Lancaster of being dishonest about who he was. In fact, she hinted at the opposite, that he was open-minded, experimental, and unwilling to be boxed in by the expectations of 1950s masculinity. She stopped short of saying he was bisexual, but left the door wide open with lines like, "He lived a bigger life than most people could imagine." Their relationship was never a secret in Hollywood circles. They were seen at restaurants, premieres, and parties together. But the depth of it, how long it lasted, what it meant wasn't clear until her book came out. By then, Lancaster had already moved on from his marriage, and Winters was decades past caring about scandal. Readers picked up on the subtext. She was describing a man torn between two worlds, one of control and public image and one of private complexity. She never made accusations, just observations. And she made it clear that Lancaster wasn't a man to explain himself. If people wanted answers, they weren't going to get them from him. Her account added a layer of intimacy to the rumors already swirling. It wasn't just speculation from tabloids or whispers from assistants. It was coming from someone who knew him behind closed doors. Someone who wasn't afraid to say he wasn't easy, wasn't simple, and didn't fit the mold. Shelley Winters told her truth. Whether Lancaster agreed with it or not, he never responded publicly. That was his way. Let them talk. He'd just keep walking. Vince Eager's 1958 encounter. He wasn't a movie star. He was a young British singer on the rise, part of the late 1950s rock and roll wave in the UK. In a 2017 interview with the Nottingham Post, he recalled one night in 1958 that never left him. He was 18. Burt Lancaster was 45 and visiting London. According to Eager, they crossed paths in a Soho nightclub popular with entertainers and agents. Eager was sitting at the bar when Lancaster approached him, friendly but direct. The actor complimented his look, asked a few questions, and then allegedly offered him a role in an upcoming film. The offer came with a condition: Eager would have to spend the night with him. Caught off guard, Eager turned him down. He said Lancaster's mood shifted instantly. What started as charm turned into anger. Lancaster allegedly called him ungrateful and stormed off. Eager said he never told anyone at the time. He didn't want the attention, and Lancaster was too big to challenge. The story stayed buried for decades. Eager never wrote a book, never shopped a screenplay. He told the story casually nearly 60 years later while talking about his time in the music business. The reporter didn't even ask about Lancaster. Eager brought him up on his own. No one else has confirmed the encounter. There are no records, photos, or second-hand accounts. Lancaster's estate never responded, and no journalist has been able to verify the details. But Eager stuck by it. He said the moment was brief but unforgettable, and that he never watched a Lancaster film the same way again. What makes the story hard to dismiss is its lack of drama. Eager wasn't angry. He wasn't even trying to accuse Lancaster of anything criminal. He just told the story as it happened, or as he remembered it. A strange night, an unexpected proposition, a quick rejection. AIDS advocacy with Hudson. In 1985, Rock Hudson publicly revealed that he was battling AIDS. It shocked the industry. He was the first major Hollywood star to come forward, and the announcement shattered decades of silence around both his sexuality and the epidemic itself. While many distanced themselves, one of the few big names who didn't flinch was Burt Lancaster. That same year, Lancaster appeared at a Hollywood fundraiser for AIDS Project Los Angeles. He didn't just show up, but took the stage and read a personal letter from Hudson, who was too sick to attend. The letter was emotional, full of pain and defiance. Lancaster's delivery was quiet but firm. The room, packed with stars, was silent. The fundraiser pulled in over $1 million, one of the largest single-night donations for AIDS relief at the time. Lancaster's involvement turned heads. He had never spoken publicly about Hudson's private life before, and he didn't now, but reading that letter was a clear statement. He was standing with his friend in front of cameras, in the middle of a cultural firestorm. This wasn't just about friendship. Lancaster had always leaned left politically. He'd marched for civil rights, spoken out against blacklisting, and fought censorship. But this moment was different. AIDS carried stigma. It was costing people their lives and their dignity. Most celebrities stayed quiet. Lancaster chose to act. He didn't join every rally or give interviews about the crisis. That wasn't his style. But that night on stage mattered. It showed loyalty, not just to Hudson, but to everyone who'd been forced into silence. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. He just did the right thing and walked away. Hudson died later that year. Lancaster never commented again. No memoir reflection, no press statement, just that one night, that one letter. In a city built on image, Lancaster had always played the long game. And in that moment, he reminded people that character isn't measured by what you say when it's easy, it's what you do when it's hard. No camera tricks, no spotlight needed, just action, quiet, visible, and unforgettable. Final years. Burt Lancaster's body finally slowed down in 1990. A serious stroke left him partially paralyzed and forced him into retirement. He spent his final years out of the public eye, living with his longtime companion, Susan Martin. They had been together quietly for years and married after his stroke. Lancaster, once so fiercely physical and expressive, now lived in near silence. He died on the 20th of October, 1994, just shy of his 81st birthday. The obituaries called him a legend, a risk-taker, a Hollywood original. He was remembered for From Here to Eternity, Elmer Gantry, and Birdman of Alcatraz. Tributes poured in from actors and directors he had mentored or challenged, or both, but the public image didn't tell the whole story. Decades later, Burt Lancaster's FBI file was declassified. The documents included references to alleged relationships with both men and women, vague notes about suspected conduct, and several redacted pages. Nothing definitive, just enough to remind readers that behind the clean-cut leading man was a figure the government never fully trusted. Kate Buford's 2000 biography, Burt Lancaster: An American Life, addressed the rumors directly. She wrote that Lancaster never confirmed or denied any allegations about his sexuality, not even privately. He wasn't evasive, he was deliberate. Buford suggested that his silence wasn't about shame, it was about protecting people, friends, lovers, maybe both. He never gave interviews explaining himself, he never published a memoir. What he left behind was a career of sharp turns, a trail of broken contracts, and a filmography packed with risk. He went from noir tough guys to political dramas to character studies that no one else would touch, all on his terms. What remains is a complicated legacy. He challenged Hollywood's rules in front of the camera and defied them behind the scenes. He made room for others by refusing to play by the old script. In the end, the mystery stayed intact. And maybe that was the point. Not everything needed to be answered. Some parts of Lancaster's life weren't for the screen. They were his. He protected them. And he took them with him. From the tragic accident that almost crippled her to being turned into a punching bag by her husband while pregnant, Doris Day has no doubt gone through hell. But on TV screens, she was the perfect girl next door. Little did most of her fans know what was truly going on behind closed doors. We'll get to that In case you don't know who Doris Day was, you're in for a treat. Doris Day, an icon. Born Doris Mary Ann Kappelhoff on April 3, 1922, she was an American actress and singer who took the industry by storm. Her journey began back in 1939 when she kicked off her career as a big band singer. Fast forward to 1945 and she hit it big with not just one but two chart-topping songs, Sentimental Journey and My Dreams Are Getting Better All the Time, thanks to her collaboration with Les Brown and his band of renown. But Doris wasn't just about the band life, she was ready to fly solo. She ditched Brown and embarked on a solo career that saw her record over 650 songs from 1947 to 1967. Talk about a powerhouse. In the 1950s and 1960s, Doris was one of the leading ladies of Hollywood. Her film career took off with the 1948 flick Romance on the High Seas, and from there she starred in a little bit of everything. Musicals, comedies, dramas, and even thrillers. Remember her as Calamity Jane in Calamity Jane, 1953? Or maybe you caught her in Alfred Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1956, alongside James Stewart. She had some unforgettable on-screen chemistry with Rock Hudson, co-starring in 3 successful comedies, including the classic Pillow Talk, 1959, which even earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. And let's not forget her appearances with the likes of Clark Gable, Cary Grant, James Cagney, and Frank Sinatra. She truly shared the screen with some of the biggest names in Hollywood. But she didn't just stop at movies. After hanging up her film boots in 1968, just as her star was shining at its brightest, she launched into television with The Doris Day Show, which ran from 1968 to 1973. Doris's talent didn't go unnoticed. She snagged a Golden Globe and the Cecil B. DeMille Award for Lifetime Achievement in Motion Pictures in 1989. Then, in 2004, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. No big deal, right? And if that wasn't enough, she also grabbed the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2008 and a Legend Award from the Society of Singers. In 2011, she scored the Los Angeles Film Critics Association's Career Achievement Award, proving she was still in the game. Just when you thought she'd slow down, Doris released her 29th studio album, My Heart, in 2011, which was packed with new material and even hit the UK top 10. By 2020, she was one of only 8 recording artists to have topped the box office in the US 4 times. But now, to the not-so-glamorous parts you may not have known. The accident. On October 14, 1937, Doris Kappelhoff, then a bright-eyed 16-year-old dancer from Cincinnati, found herself in a starkly different world as she lay in a hospital bed at Mercy Hospital. Just hours before, she had been filled with dreams of a dazzling Hollywood future, preparing to take the leap into stardom. That dream now lay in shambles around her, shattered by a terrible car accident that had altered the course of her life. The night before the accident was supposed to be a celebration. Doris, along with her dance partner Jerry Dougherty, had just signed a 5-year contract with an organization that supplied dancers to the movie industry in Hollywood. They were ready to embark on a new adventure, leaving behind the familiar stages of the Netherland Plaza Hotel and the Cincinnati Club, where they had performed countless times. Friends had gathered for a farewell party at the home of Mr. Clarence Holden, offering well wishes and sending them off with dreams of success. Doris and Jerry felt unstoppable, fueled by the excitement of what lay ahead. But as fate would have it, the ride home from the party took a tragic turn. Doris, Jerry, and 2 other friends, Albert Schroeder and Marion Bonekamp, were in the car when it collided with a freight train at 5th and High Streets. The impact was catastrophic. In an instant, the bright future Doris had envisioned was turned upside down. After the crash, Doris was left lying on the parkway, surrounded by debris, her leg injured, and her dreams feeling distant. As paramedics arrived, the reality of her situation set in. "My leg is broken. My leg is broken," she cried out, her voice filled with fear and desperation as she was loaded into the ambulance. She pleaded for her mother, Alma Kappelhoff, who had planned to accompany her to Hollywood, knowing how much this meant to her daughter. In the chaos, Jerry rushed to her side, his concern palpable as he tried to assess the situation. When he realized the extent of her injuries, it broke his heart. For nearly 6 years, they had danced together, preparing for this moment, and now it felt as if everything had come crashing down. Despite the pain and fear, Doris tried to comfort him, assuring him that she would dance again. After the accident, the hospital staff examined Doris's injuries. They confirmed that she had suffered a broken leg, which would require at least 4 months of recovery. The news was a heavy blow to Doris, who had spent countless hours training in ballet and voice, preparing for her moment in the spotlight. She couldn't help but think of how close she was to achieving her dreams, only to be sidelined by this terrible accident. Doris's mother remained by her side, trying to keep her spirits up. She reminded Doris that they would have to wait until spring for their trip to Hollywood, a statement that felt like salt in the wound. Meanwhile, the other passengers, Albert and Marion, sustained various cuts and bruises but were otherwise okay, which was a small comfort in the aftermath of the crash. As days turned into weeks in the hospital, Doris grappled with her injury and the toll it took on her aspirations. While she was stuck in bed, her dreams of dancing faded like the sunlight outside her window. However, instead of letting despair consume her, Doris began to channel her energy into singing. She recognized that while her dancing career was on hold, her voice could still carry her to new heights. During her recovery, she immersed herself in vocal training, honing her talent and finding solace in music. This decision would ultimately set the stage for a remarkable transformation in her career. Just a few months later, bandleader Les Brown heard Doris's voice and recognized her extraordinary talent. He offered her a chance to sing with his band, which opened the door to her first major hit, Sentimental Journey. From that point on, Doris Day became a household name, charming audiences with her voice and her infectious smile, all the while carrying the lessons learned from that harrowing night. The accident may have altered her path, but it didn't define her. Instead, it shaped her into the iconic figure she would become, showing the world that the show must go on, no matter the obstacles. She was a fake girl next door. Doris Day was the epitome of the girl next door in Hollywood, a bright, cheerful figure who seemed to embody innocence and charm. But let's be real, that persona was a carefully crafted image, a product of what studio executives and publicists wanted to sell to the American public. Behind all that sunshine and sweetness, Doris's life was filled with struggles that didn't quite fit the wholesome package she was expected to deliver. When Doris first hit the scene in the late 1940s, she was marketed like a dream. Films like Romance on the High Seas and Pillow Talk showcased her as the perfect, lovable heroine who always ended up with the guy. And why wouldn't they want to promote that? After World War II, people were craving stories that reaffirmed traditional values, and Doris was just the gal for the job. But here's where it gets interesting. While she was playing these roles, her real life was anything but picture perfect. Even as her career took off, Doris often found herself forced into roles that didn't resonate with her true self. After her split from Jordan, she wanted to branch out and try more serious parts, but Hollywood wasn't having it. Instead, they pushed her back into those light-hearted romantic comedies, reinforcing that sweet girl image. It was like a never-ending cycle of play the part, don't rock the boat. As the years went by, Doris started to feel suffocated by the very persona that had made her a star. By the 1960s, she was a household name, but it came with a hefty price tag of public expectations. People wanted her to keep smiling, keep being that innocent, carefree woman, even as her personal life began to unravel. From marriage problems to substance abuse, the real Doris Day was a far cry from what you saw on TV, and the executives knew this and hid this from the world. She was a punching bag. Doris Day was the golden girl of Hollywood. She was often portrayed as a bubbly, cheerful persona that made her an endearing figure on screen. But behind that sunny exterior was a darker reality, one marked by a series of awful and abusive relationships that would leave deep emotional scars. Doris's first marriage to Al Jordan, a big band musician, began with a whirlwind romance that quickly devolved into a nightmare. They married in 1946, and Doris was excited about starting a family. However, as time went on, the shadows of their relationship grew longer. Al, who struggled with his own demons, reportedly became physically violent towards Doris. This was not just limited to emotional manipulation. He was known to have hit her even while she was pregnant with their son Terry. Imagine the fear and helplessness Doris must have felt, carrying a child while facing such violence from someone she had trusted and loved. The abuse took a significant toll on Doris. It was not merely a series of physical assaults. It was an all-encompassing emotional struggle. Doris had to endure feeling trapped in a marriage where love was replaced by fear. But there was also her career to think of. The pressure to maintain her public image as America's sweetheart compounded her pain. After all, how could someone so beloved be experiencing such turmoil? This facade became an overwhelming burden, forcing her to conceal her struggles while putting on a brave face for the world. But soon enough, even Doris took a stand and said, "Enough is enough." The tipping point came when Doris realized she could no longer endure the abuse. Summoning every ounce of strength, she left Al, taking their son with her. Leaving was a significant and courageous step, but it was also the beginning of a long healing process. Doris had to confront the trauma of her past while also working hard to provide for her son. The emotional scars from the abuse lingered long after she escaped the situation. It would take years of self-discovery, therapy, and self-reflection for her to reclaim her sense of self-worth. The impact of her first marriage didn't just fade away with time. Doris often spoke about how the violence she experienced shaped her views on relationships and love. Even as she found success in her career, the shadow of her past continued to follow her. For years, she struggled with trust and intimacy, fearing that any new relationship might mirror her experiences with Al. But at another attempt at love, Doris faced an equally worse fate: sleeping with the enemy. When Doris married Martin in 1951, she believed she had found a partner who would support and love her unconditionally. Martin was not just her husband. He was also her manager, guiding her career and helping her navigate Hollywood. For many years, it seemed like they were a perfect match. Doris trusted him completely, letting him take the reins on her finances and career decisions. She was focused on her work, pouring herself into singing, acting, and making films. Meanwhile, Martin was handling the business side of things, or so she thought. However, as it turned out, Martin had a darker side that Doris never fully grasped. While she was busy being America's sweetheart, he was allegedly squandering her fortune, which was estimated to be around $20 million at the time. Imagine putting your trust in someone so deeply, only to find out later that they were secretly draining your bank account. It was a betrayal of the highest order. And when Doris learned the truth after Martin's demise in 1968, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. After Martin passed away, Doris began to dig into their finances, and what she uncovered was nothing short of shocking. Not only had Martin mismanaged her money, but he had also kept her completely in the dark about their financial ruin. There were no warnings, no discussions about budgeting, or even any hints that they were in dire straits. Instead, Doris found herself facing the harsh reality of almost being bankrupt. The man she had trusted most had not only betrayed her financially but also emotionally, leaving her feeling lost and alone. To add insult to injury, Martin had taken it a step further by secretly signing her up for a television series, The Doris Day Show, without her knowledge or consent. He knew that this would be a major project for her, but rather than discussing it with her, he just went ahead and made the decision on his own. Her own husband had run you into the ground financially, but he also made major career moves without consulting her. It must have been infuriating for Doris, who had built her career through hard work and determination. Eventually, Doris had to pick up the pieces of her shattered financial situation, and it wasn't easy. She found herself navigating bankruptcy and financial recovery at a time when she was also grappling with the emotional fallout from Martin's betrayal. It was a real wake-up call for her, forcing her to take control of her life in a way she never had to before. She had always relied on Martin to handle the business side, but now she needed to become her own advocate and financial manager. Despite the challenges, Doris faced this new chapter with resilience. She stepped into her role on The Doris Day Show, using it as an opportunity to rebuild her career and regain her financial footing. This series became a significant part of her life, allowing her to showcase her talent to a new generation while also helping to restore her wealth. Slowly but surely, she began to claw her way back from the brink of financial disaster. Looking back, Doris often reflected on her experiences with Martin. She learned the hard way that trust, while essential in relationships, should also be accompanied by awareness and oversight. It was a painful lesson, but it ultimately shaped her into a stronger and more independent woman. She would go on to advocate for animal rights and focus on her passions, turning the page on a tumultuous chapter in her life. She was lonely. Doris Day's life really shows that fame doesn't always come with happiness. Sure, she was the charming girl next door that everyone loved, lighting up the screen and belting out catchy tunes. But behind that bright smile, she often felt more alone than you'd think. It's a real twist, because the more popular she got, the more isolated she felt. Imagine being adored by millions but still feeling lonely at night. As Doris's star began to shine in the 50s and 60s, the pressure to maintain that perfect image only grew. People saw her as this bubbly, carefree icon, but underneath she was battling feelings of isolation. While other celebs might have thrived at glamorous parties, Doris longed for something deeper, real connections with people who got her, not just her public persona. She was in this weird position where everyone loved her, but the fame made it hard to find genuine friendships. The conversations she had often felt like they were skimming the surface, and she craved those heart-to-heart talks that could really make you feel connected. The glitzy world of Hollywood sometimes felt more like a bubble that kept her from forming true bonds. Plus, being under the media's microscope didn't help. Every little thing she did was scrutinized, and her personal life became the topic of gossip. It's like she was on a stage, but the audience only saw a performance, not the person behind the curtain. The very fame that brought her adoration also made it difficult for her to share her real self. She wanted to connect with others, but she was always worried about how people would judge her. Her romantic life added to that loneliness. Her first marriage to Al Jordan was pretty rocky, and her third husband, Martin Melcher, turned out to be a huge disappointment when it came to trusting him with her finances. Those experiences left her feeling scarred and hesitant to open up to new people. She really wanted companionship, but her past made it hard for her to trust anyone. In her quieter moments, Doris reflected on her life and couldn't shake off the sadness. She'd often say that, even with all her success, she felt a void inside. Sure, she had the fame, the fan mail, and the accolades, but none of that could replace the comfort of true companionship. At times, she just wanted someone to share her life with, someone real to lean on in a world that felt so fake. But sadly, she never had that. So she poured herself into her music and acting, maybe hoping that by sharing her feelings, she could connect with others on a deeper level. Songs like Que Sera Sera really hit home, not just for her fans, but for her too. Through her performances, she sought to bridge the gap between the dazzling Doris everyone saw and the lonely woman she felt like inside. The tragic demise. Doris Day's life took a heartbreaking turn when her son, Terry Melcher, passed away. Terry was born in 1942 during her tumultuous first marriage to Al Jordan. As a child, he was surrounded by all Hollywood had to offer, and Doris was fiercely protective of him. She worked hard to give him a stable upbringing, especially considering the chaos she faced in her own life. Terry grew up to become a talented music producer and songwriter, working with some of the biggest names in the industry, like the Byrds and Paul McCartney. He had his own share of success and seemed to be carving out a unique identity in the music world, separate from his mother's enormous shadow. Doris was incredibly proud of him and often spoke about how talented he was, which must have brought her immense joy given the struggles she faced in her relationships. However, the dark clouds of tragedy loomed over their family. In 2004, Terry was diagnosed with skin cancer, and Doris watched helplessly as her beloved son battled the disease. It was a devastating blow for her, as she had already endured so much heartache throughout her life, including abusive relationships and the pressure of fame. Terry fought hard, but the cancer took its toll, and he passed away in November 2004 at the age of 62. The loss of her son was like a devastating earthquake in Doris's life, shaking her to the core. She was deeply affected by his passing, feeling an emptiness that words could hardly describe. Doris often reflected on her relationship with Terry, emphasizing how close they were and how they leaned on each other throughout their lives. After losing him, she poured her grief into her work and her love for animals, dedicating her energy to animal rights activism. It was as if she sought to channel her pain into something positive, honoring Terry's memory by continuing to make the world a better place. When you watch a film, what do you see? The story, the plot, the actors and actresses. All of these come together to create the perfect film. But you probably missed some things in your favorite films. They create a beautiful viewing experience. The list goes on, but did you miss these little details? The horse from The Wizard of Oz. One of the coolest hidden details in the movie is something you may have missed. Remember when Dorothy and her friends arrive in Emerald City? They ride in a carriage pulled by a horse that magically changes colors, and you see it go from purple to red to yellow, and it's such a fun little moment that adds to the whimsical vibe of Oz. But here's the thing, this was all done practically, no CGI obviously because it's 1939. The filmmakers used white horses and applied vegetable-based dyes to their coats to create the effect. They picked vegetable dye because it was safe for the animals and easy to wash off. They had to shoot those scenes quickly though, because the horses kept licking the dye off themselves. Imagine the crew scrambling between takes to make sure the horse still looked camera ready. It's such a clever and subtle touch that makes the magic of Oz feel real, even though it's a simple old-school trick. Next time you watch, pay attention to the transitions. It's seamless and still holds up as a great piece of movie magic. The Snow Globe from Citizen Kane. In Citizen Kane, the snow globe in Kane's hand during his final moments isn't just a cool prop, it's a hidden clue to what's really going on with him. Here's the deal. As Kane whispers Rosebud and dies, we see the snow globe fall and shatter. But if you look closely, the snow globe's reflection shows his childhood home. It was the house he lived in before being sent away to a life of wealth and isolation. It's a quiet but powerful detail. That snow globe ties everything together. His last word, Rosebud, is the sled he played with as a kid. The snowy scene inside the globe represents the happy, simple life he lost. The fact that this reflection is there, but not immediately obvious, is what makes it so brilliant. It's one of those blink-and-you-miss-it moments, but it's packed with meaning. Kane's entire life was about trying to fill the emptiness from losing that childhood happiness, and this little snow globe is the perfect symbol of it. It's subtle, clever, and such a genius touch by Orson Welles. The Tears in Casablanca. One of the most emotional scenes in Casablanca is when the patrons of Rick's Cafe sing La Marseillaise to drown out the Germans. It's powerful enough on its own, but here's the hidden layer. Many of the extras in that scene were actual refugees who had fled Nazi-occupied Europe. When the actors started singing, it wasn't just acting. For those refugees, the French national anthem was deeply personal, a defiant symbol of freedom and resistance against the Nazis. Their tears and the raw emotion you see on their faces are 100% real. This backstory makes the scene hit even harder. It's not just a stirring moment in the film. It's a genuine expression of grief, hope, and defiance from people who had lived through the horrors of war. Knowing that makes the scene all the more unforgettable. Number 13 from Shadow of a Doubt. In Shadow of a Doubt, Alfred Hitchcock does a brilliant job of using subtle motifs to hint at the dark side of Uncle Charlie. One of the most interesting is his use of the number 13, which pops up multiple times in the film as a quiet but consistent symbol of danger and doom. For example, Uncle Charlie lives in a house with 13 steps leading up to it. Then there's a scene where he's watching a train station clock that's stuck at 13 minutes past the hour. And let's not forget the scene where Charlie, his niece, finds a note with a 13 written on it, hinting at something ominous in the works. It's not obvious, but Hitchcock uses the number 13 to foreshadow Uncle Charlie's sinister nature. It hints that something bad is coming without saying it outright. The number 13 traditionally has a negative, unlucky association, and Hitchcock plays with that cultural symbolism to subtly remind us that Uncle Charlie is not the lovable, charming man he appears to be. It's a perfect example of Hitchcock's genius at building tension with tiny, almost invisible details. The Pool from Sunset Boulevard. The detail of Norma Desmond's pool being shaped like a coffin is a chilling piece of visual storytelling that foreshadows the film's opening murder in a very subtle, almost subconscious way. At first glance, the pool just seems like another luxurious, decadent feature of her mansion. But it looks like a coffin. That's eerie given the film's dark themes of death, decay, and obsolescence. Norma Desmond is a once famous silent film star clinging desperately to the past, and the pool's design reflects that obsession with both death and the idea of being trapped in a bygone era. This visual metaphor also ties into her character's fate. Throughout the film, Norma is portrayed as someone who is slowly losing touch with reality, and by the time of the murder, she has completely snapped. The coffin-shaped pool acts as a visual hint that death, both literal and metaphorical, is looming over her. It's a clever, subtle foreshadowing. It reminds the audience that Norma's life and the film are heading to a tragic end. Ghostly shadow in the third leg. In The Third Man, 1949, one of the most genius moments of suspense happens before we even see Harry Lime, played by Orson Welles. Early in the film, the protagonist Holly Martins walks down a dark alley. Harry's shadow makes a ghostly appearance on the wall before he is revealed. This moment is brilliant for a few reasons. First, it sets up Harry Lime as a mysterious figure long before we meet him face to face. The shadow feels like a looming presence, suggesting that Lime is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's as if he's haunting the film from the very start, and the tension builds as we wonder who this elusive figure is. The shadows in this scene fit the film's noir style. In noir, light and darkness represent the character's moral ambiguity. Harry Lime, as we later discover, is morally murky, a charming yet unscrupulous man. So his shadow isn't just a visual effect, it's a metaphor for his presence in the film and his impact on those around him. It's a subtle but incredibly effective way of introducing a character that remains shrouded in mystery until the big reveal. Champagne bottle in Notorious. In Notorious, 1946, Alfred Hitchcock uses a simple yet brilliant prop, the champagne bottle, as a ticking time bomb in one of the film's most suspenseful scenes. This moment is a perfect example of Hitchcock's ability to turn everyday objects into symbols of tension and danger. At a party, Alicia, Ingrid Bergman, must retrieve a hidden key from a champagne bottle. It's a setup for a larger espionage plot. Devlin, Cary Grant, is there too. The bottle itself isn't just a prop, it's a metaphor for the time bomb ticking down. You see, the moment Alicia touches that bottle, the stakes are raised. The audience knows something dangerous is coming. The champagne bottle becomes a symbol of suspense. Every clink of the glass, every slow motion of it being passed around, feels like the ticking of a bomb. Mysterious Rebecca in Rebecca. One of the most unsettling aspects of the film is the never-seen face of Rebecca herself. Though she's dead before the story even begins, her presence is felt throughout the entire film, looming over everything and everyone, especially the new Mrs. De Winter, Joan Fontaine. The fact that we never actually see Rebecca, her face, her voice, nothing, makes her influence even more oppressive. Hitchcock uses this absence to create an eerie and psychological tension. Rebecca's memory is so powerful that it's almost as if she's a character in her own right, dominating the lives of the people around her. The housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, is obsessed with Rebecca, constantly comparing the new Mrs. De Winter to her and making her feel inferior. Rebecca's personal items, like her clothes and even her monogrammed things, are still in the house, adding to the feeling that she's never really gone. Her shadow casts over everything, making the new wife feel like a mere placeholder in Rebecca's life and marriage. The mystery in the big sleep. One of the standout features is the deliberately unreadable murder mystery that keeps viewers on their toes. The film, based on a novel by Raymond Chandler, throws a bunch of plot twists, shady characters, and unsolved questions at the audience. It leaves some clues unresolved on purpose. This ambiguity isn't a mistake. It's a hallmark of film noir. In that genre, moral clarity is often blurred. The line between good and bad is unclear. The film presents a web of linked crimes, a missing sister, blackmail, and murders. By the end, some details remain unresolved. The audience never really gets to know all the facts behind the murders, or even the true motivations of some characters. The mystery feels almost like a puzzle that can't fully be solved, leaving a lingering sense of confusion and uncertainty. The Anklet from Double Indemnity. In Double Indemnity, 1944, Barbara Stanwyck's anklet is one of the most subtle but powerfully suggestive details that perfectly encapsulates her character, Phyllis Dietrichson. At first glance, the anklet seems like a small, almost frivolous piece of jewelry, but in the context of the film, it becomes a symbol of Phyllis's allure and the danger she embodies. The anklet first appears when Phyllis is introduced to Walter Neff, played by Fred MacMurray, and it immediately draws attention, just like Phyllis herself. It's a small detail, but its significance grows as the film progresses. The anklet is delicate and feminine, but it also has a hint of sexual allure. Phyllis uses her charm and beauty to manipulate the men around her, and the anklet, like her entire persona, lures Walter into her web of deceit and crime. But beyond its sexual allure, the anklet also carries an underlying sense of danger. In classic noir fashion, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. The Falcon reveal in The Maltese Falcon. The reveal of the Falcon as a fake is one of the most brilliant and subtle commentaries on greed in the entire film. Throughout the movie, the Falcon is the object of obsession, the coveted treasure that everyone is desperate to possess. It represents the ultimate prize, the pinnacle of wealth and power, driving the characters to deceit, betrayal, and murder. But in the end, the Falcon is a worthless replica. It undermines all the violence, lies, and manipulation surrounding it. Background sound in Singin' in the Rain. In this film, Lena Lamont's first talkie scene has clever details. They reveal the struggles of early sound film production. Lena's voice is grating and unbearable. That's a big problem. Her character is a leading lady, but her voice doesn't match her glamorous image. However, if you listen closely to the background sounds in that scene, you can hear something interesting. A lot of mechanical noise, like the sound of the recording equipment. This subtle sound cue reveals that the problem isn't just Lena's voice, it's the equipment. The microphone and sound technology of the time are clearly struggling to capture her voice properly, emphasizing that it's not necessarily the actors who are at fault, but the limitations of the technology itself. Overlapping dialogue in His Girl Friday. One of the most innovative techniques that set the film apart was its use of overlapping dialogue. This was a revolutionary choice. It broke from the slow, traditional dialogue common in films of that era. The overlapping dialogue, where characters talk over each other and interrupt one another frequently, created a more natural, fast-paced tone that mimicked real-life conversations. In most films of the time, dialogue was delivered in a more structured way, with clear pauses between characters' lines. But in His Girl Friday, director Howard Hawks embraced the chaotic, rapid-fire exchanges that happen in actual conversations, especially in the hectic world of the newsroom where the film is set. This choice not only added a sense of realism, but also helped to establish the breakneck speed of the story. The characters are always on the move, always talking, and always trying to stay one step ahead. The dance sequence in The Red Shoes. In The Red Shoes, 1948, a memorable moment is the dance sequence. It blends reality and fantasy so well that it feels like the film's world is dancing with the lead character, Vicky Page. This sequence, which takes place during a performance of the ballet The Red Shoes, is not just a visually stunning moment, it's a profound commentary on the consuming power of art. The sequence starts in a very grounded, realistic way, showing Vicky in rehearsal and on stage, but as the dance progresses, the lines between the performance and her real life begin to blur. The dust in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. The final scene in this movie is one of the most powerful moments in cinema, and the blowing dust serves as a symbolic reflection of the fleeting nature of wealth and ambition. Throughout the film, Gold is the driving force behind the character's actions, and it promises riches and success. But by the end, the film reveals the devastating truth. Wealth, when pursued blindly, is ephemeral and ultimately destructive. In the final scene, as the treasure hunters, Dobbs, Curtin, and Howard, realize that the gold they fought so hard for is lost in the mountains, the wind begins to blow dust across the barren desert. This dust is symbolic on multiple levels. On one hand, it represents the insignificance of their efforts in the grand scheme of things. The treasure they risked everything for is now lost, and nature itself seems to sweep it away, showing how fleeting and fragile human desires and ambitions can be. The portrait in Laura. The portrait of the title character, Laura Hunt, is a central object in the film that embodies the mystery and allure surrounding her. What makes this portrait even more intriguing is that it wasn't a traditional painting. It was actually a photograph that had been touched up with paint. This choice adds an ethereal, almost dreamlike quality to Laura's image, enhancing the sense of mystery that shrouds her character throughout the film. The striptease in Gilda. Rita Hayworth's iconic glove striptease is one of the most memorable moments in classic film, but what makes it truly fascinating is how it subverts expectations. At first glance, the scene seems like a typical seductive moment designed to dazzle and titillate. After all, Hayworth, playing the titular character Gilda, is an alluring femme fatale, and the act of slowly removing her gloves could easily be read as a moment of sexual power. However, what's often overlooked is how the scene is actually more about vulnerability than seduction. Gilda's movements, though outwardly seductive, are imbued with a deeper sense of emotional exposure. The knuckle tattoos in The Night of the Hunter. Robert Mitchum's character, Reverend Harry Powell, is one of the most chilling villains in cinema history, and his love and hate tattoos on his knuckles are a perfect example of how subtle details can serve as a powerful moral allegory. These tattoos are not just simple markings. They symbolize the core struggle between good and evil that runs through the entire film. Each tattoo is prominently displayed during the numerous fistfights and confrontational moments that Powell has with other characters. As he raises his fist to strike, the words love and hate are in clear view, making them almost seem like a visual representation of his internal battle. Shadows and light in a streetcar named Desire. The use of shadow and light is a key visual tool that director Elia Kazan uses to reflect Blanche Dubois' fragile mental state. One of the most striking examples of this is the recurring motif of the paper lantern, which Blanche uses to cover a harsh light bulb in her room. This simple object becomes a powerful symbol throughout the film, representing Blanche's desire to conceal the painful realities of her past and present. Blanche is a character defined by her inability to face the truth about herself. She has fled her past in the South, carrying with her the trauma of a failed marriage, the loss of her family home, and a history of personal degradation. The harsh light, which symbolizes truth, reality, and the harshness of her circumstances, is something Blanche cannot bear. The paper lantern acts as her attempt to soften or hide these truths, creating a dim, flattering light that distorts her surroundings and, symbolically, her perception of reality. The staircase in Vertigo. In Vertigo, 1958, Alfred Hitchcock uses the spiraling staircase as a powerful visual motif that mirrors the character's psychological descent, particularly that of the protagonist, Scotty Ferguson, played by James Stewart. The staircase is much more than just a physical object in the film. It becomes a symbol of the spirals of obsession, guilt, and emotional unraveling that consume Scotty. Throughout the film, Scotty's mental state is portrayed as unstable and increasingly obsessive, especially as he becomes fixated on the mysterious Madeline Elster, as Scotty descends into the depths of his obsession. The staircase, specifically the spirals of the staircase, serve as a direct visual parallel to his emotional and psychological descent. The shape of the staircase mirrors his spiraling thoughts, his inability to break free from his fixation, and his gradual losing grip on reality. The motif appears several times throughout the film, notably when Scotty is in the process of investigating Madeleine's disappearance. The visual of the swirling staircase seems to pull him deeper into a state of mind where he can't distinguish between fantasy and reality, much like the disorienting dizziness he experiences due to his acrophobia, fear of heights. The tight, closed-loop structure of the spiral symbolizes the circular nature of his thoughts. He cannot escape his fixation, and every time he tries to move forward, he ends up right back where he started, overwhelmed by his emotions and his need to uncover the truth about Madeline. The staircase also plays a pivotal role in the film's most famous scene, the moment when Scotty literally falls, spiraling downwards, when he tries to chase Judy, who he believes is Madeline, up the bell tower. The fall itself is a physical representation of the emotional collapse he's been undergoing throughout the film. The staircase thus not only symbolizes Scotty's internal disarray, but also foreshadows the eventual collapse of his obsession and the tragedy that follows. In Vertigo, the spiraling staircase is a brilliant visual metaphor hidden in plain sight for the destructive nature of obsession and the way it leads to a psychological and emotional breakdown. It's a motif that doesn't just serve as part of the plot's structure, it encapsulates the very essence of the film's exploration of identity, guilt, and the danger of losing oneself in the past. Framed shots in Stagecoach. In Stagecoach, 1939, director John Ford expertly uses carefully framed shots to subtly reveal the inner struggles of his characters, and one of the most effective examples of this is the tension between the preacher, Reverend Dr. Samuel Johnson Clayton, and Dallas, the woman with a tarnished reputation. Ford's use of framing isn't just about creating visually stunning compositions, it's a storytelling tool that deepens the emotional complexity of the characters and their relationships. Reverend Clayton, played by Thomas Mitchell, is a deeply conflicted character. On one hand, he's a preacher, representing moral authority and spiritual guidance. On the other hand, his personal beliefs and actions are challenged by the presence of Dallas, played by Claire Trevor, a woman who's been ostracized from society for her past as a prostitute. The tension between them is palpable, and Ford's framing of these characters in certain shots highlights the inner struggles they are both facing.